Morning, good afternoon, everyone. As you join, I would like firstly to share a few housekeeping items with you. Please note that the chat will be enabled during the whole event. Feel free to share any questions you have for the panelists in the Q&A feature on Zoom, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. American Sign Language and International Sign Language will be provided throughout the session and pinned to the screen, as you can see now. Closed captioning in English will also be provided. To access the closed captions, please click the closed captioning button also at the bottom of your screen. If you have any trouble with Zoom features, please use the chat so we can assist you. We will be monitoring the chat throughout the session. Also note that the event will be recorded. By remaining in the session, you are providing your consent to be recorded. Any information you share in the chat and Q&A is visible to all participants and may be captured as part of the recording also. And last but not least, we will also be dropping the IFES Code of Conduct and the privacy policy into the chat for your reference. Now, I would like to welcome officially everyone to the session, Youth with Disabilities Lead, linking the Summit for Democracy and the Global Disability Summit. My name is Irina Tekuchova. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And as a quick self-description, I'm a 32-year-old white woman with wavy hair, and I'm wearing now my glasses. I have the beige sweater on, and there is a boring white wall on my background. I'm a PhD candidate in the dancing project in Maynooth University, Ireland, and for several years I have been working as a consultant for Ukrainian organization of people with disabilities, Fight for Right. Fight for Right cooperates with International Foundation for Electoral Systems on US government programming that focuses particularly on political participation of young people with disabilities in Ukraine. I would like to thank our partners for cooperation, particularly in this difficult time for Ukraine and Ukrainian disability community. In the framework of our upcoming discussion today, I would like to underline the importance of participation of young people with disabilities in the decision-making process, because sometimes it's a matter of life and safety. I'm proud that young Ukrainians with disabilities are now starting to take leading role in facilitating dialogue with the government, as well as organizing measures to ensure safety of the community of people with disabilities in face of potential Russian aggression. So this discussion on empowering young people with disabilities is of particular relevance in the current period. Last year, I was honored to moderate the panel on disability rights at Summit for Democracy. We had a very thoughtful discussion with prominent disability leaders on political leadership and visibility of disability community nationally and internationally. Today, we would like to continue this discussion with young leaders with disabilities. As part of the Global Disability Summit, the IFES, together with the United States Agency for International Development, will be co-hosting this session, which will explore how Disability Inclusive Democracy Year of Action, stemming from Summit for Democracy, can be leveraged to enhance political participation and access of young people with disabilities to policymaking. The session consists of two panels, 30 minutes each. The first panel will feature two speakers from USAID who will provide updates on USAID's forthcoming disability and youth policies. And the second panel will consist of two young leaders with disabilities who will be able to discuss challenges young people face when participating in political life. As I mentioned in the beginning, you will have an opportunity to address questions following both panels. Please drop them in the Q&A feature in Zoom. And without further ado, now I would like to give the floor to Virginia Atkinson, IFES Senior Global Inclusion Advisor, who will be moderating the first panel. Virginia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Irina. And I think I speak for many of us on the call today when I say our thoughts are with you, your fellow advocates, and the people of Ukraine right now. So I'm a white woman with light brown shoulder-length hair, and I'm wearing a light green shirt. And there are two paintings behind me, also on a rather boring white wall, like Irina's. So in the last few months, there have been two significant summits resulting in commitments from government and civil society. There was the December 2021 Summit for Democracy and the ongoing Global Disability Summit. IFES made some commitments focused around young people with disabilities as part of the Global Disability Summit. So nearly half of the world's population is 25 years old or younger, and young people are critical decision makers and positive change agents in their communities, but often face significant barriers to participation in political life. And young people with disabilities face additional legal, physical, attitudinal, and information barriers to meaningful political participation. So IFES really believes that it's imperative that young people with disabilities are involved in shaping policies that affect them, and that young people with disabilities are represented in leadership and in government positions. So in the next 2 years, IFES has committed to partnering with young people with disabilities to conduct political leadership trainings in at least 4 countries around the world. And we will also be supporting internships with government institutions, political parties, and civil society organizations so that young people with disabilities can apply the skills that were gained during the course. We're also ensuring that our online civic education curriculum for university students is developed in an accessible manner. And then lastly, we've committed to conducting some research in partnership with young people with disabilities into the best practices around non-formal civic education. So civic education that occurs outside of school settings. And we are really looking forward to working with hopefully many of you on this call today on some of these initiatives. Our colleagues at USAID have also made some commitments as part of these 2 recent summits. And I have the pleasure of moderating our discussion today with Katherine Guernsey, who's USAID's Disability Rights Coordinator, and Mike McCabe, who is USAID's Senior Advisor on Youth. So Kathy is responsible for advising the entire agency on disability inclusion, both at the program and policy levels. And she also manages the agency's Disability Program Fund. Mike oversees implementation of, again, the entire agency's youth policy and coordinates technical support and training for USAID staff on youth. So as you can see, they're both uniquely placed to talk about the US government's commitment to engaging more young people with disabilities in political life. And this conversation is particularly timely because in addition to the recent Summit for Democracy and the ongoing Global Disability Summit, USAID is also currently in the process of updating both their disability and their youth policies. So we're going to have a few questions with Mike and Kathy that'll be moderated, and then some Q&A. So please, as you think of them, pop any questions into the chat. So first, Mike, Kathy, with the release of the new USAID youth and disability policies, how do you see these supporting young leaders with disabilities and furthering the way they're doing work in communities around the world?
Thanks so much, Virginia, and to everyone who's on this session today. You know, we often talk that we're at an inflection point in terms of USAID's work with what we call Generation 2030, this generation of young people who want to advance the development of their communities, their country, or global issues. And our new youth policy is all about changing the focus from youth as beneficiaries, which was often the way that it was addressed in the past, and to this new policy, which really talks about youth as partners and change makers. And we don't even use the word beneficiaries in the new policy. So it's building on their sense of agency. And as you've heard Administrator Power talk recently, she's talked about how she wants to see USAID as the agency for inclusive development. And our new youth policy is really focused on these key principles as a way of orienting our missions, our staff, and our partners to improve that programming with youth in all their diversity. And so one of the core principles of the new policy that rolls out next month is to recognize that youth are not homogeneous, to promote meaningful inclusion of diverse groups of young people, and to address the systemic barriers that they face, whether it's based on gender or race or ethnicity, disability, or other orientations. So the focus is on improving our support for youth-led action. That's what's new about our policy. And we're already doing that through a lot of recent mechanisms like Youth Excel, which is our first time where we're doing youth-led implementation research on issues of mental health and wellness or on violence reduction, or Youth Lead, which is networking young change makers, many that are young change makers with disabilities or working in the disability community, and our new Imagine Youth Challenge, which is getting a human-centered design approach to innovation to fund youth-led efforts and local solutions. So when we launch this policy next month, the partnership is about this focus on inclusion, and our Global Lead Initiative, which is a 4-year commitment to support 1 million young change makers, is using things like our Youth Lead platform and some of our new investments to really make sure that we are supporting youth from diverse backgrounds. And we appreciated the inputs that we got in this new policy, both from youth with disabilities, but also from in the focus groups, but also from a lot of other organizations that talked about how we needed to be intentional in that, whether it was IFES or Special Olympics or World Learning or UNICEF and a lot of others, the Global Education and a Campaign for Inclusive Education. So those have been ways that we're trying to build out that dialogue. And we really look forward to, as we move forward with this policy, continuing that partnership. Kathy?
Thanks, Mike, and thank you, IFES, for organizing and hosting this today. We really appreciate it. So very quickly, I'm a white cisgender woman with curly shoulder-length brown hair, gray glasses, wearing a dark blue shirt with white flowers, and I have a wooden cabinet with too much stuff on it behind me. So we are at a much earlier stage of updating the USAID's disability policy than where the youth policy is. We're still in the drafting phase of our update, having done some pre-draft consultations. But we're excited for the opportunity to update the policy and ensure that it's something that really responds to the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century. And it ensures that it creates a policy framework that supports USAID's work with all persons with disabilities, including youth with disabilities. When the draft is ready for public review and comment, we will post that on the USAID website. And we really encourage youth with disabilities from around the world to give us your feedback so we can be sure that that new policy responds to your lived reality and supports the important work that you're doing.
Thanks so much, Mike and Kathy. I think we've actually heard two big pieces of news there. One is that USAID's new youth policy is going to be released next month. So yay. And then the other is that young people with disabilities are going to have the opportunity to provide feedback on the new USAID disability policy, which is coming soon. So that's really exciting pieces of information there. I think, so everyone joining us today might not be familiar with the Summit for Democracy, but it is beginning to generate a lot of conversation and hopefully actionable recommendations around the major themes of the summit, which were defending against authoritarianism, addressing and fighting corruption, and human rights. So how do you see young people with disabilities implementing recommendations in these focus areas and trying to sort of keep the momentum from the summit going forwards into the future?
Yeah, it's not always easy to get youth well represented in global summits. And obviously this Global Disability Summit has been a model of doing a great job at that. USAID, and especially you'll hear from Neetha later in the Democracy, Rights and Governance Center and the Youth Office and others, really worked hard for inclusion of youth and all their diversity in the Summit for Democracy. And it required a lot of advocacy, which maybe it shouldn't have needed that much advocacy. In the end, we had 3 great events that included a lot of people, young leaders, including from the disability community, that met with Administrator Samantha Power, Secretary of State Blinken, and others. Now we need to focus on the year of action and beyond. And a few things on the docket for this year of action, which summits are great for what they are. It's bringing attention to a particular set of issues. The year of action is really meant to launch a long-term partnership around taking action on those 4 pillars you mentioned. So some of the things coming up is there will be a Youth Democracy Summit later in 2022 by and for young changemakers. And we want to have, some of the young changemakers who are on this call today and this webinar to be part of that planning of it so that it really does carry the voice of all young people. 2, we're rolling out some new initiatives. Neetha will talk about one that she's working on, Powered by the People. Global Lead and Youth Lead, as I mentioned, is a network to inspire, support, and connect young change makers across education, civic political engagement, and leadership development. And I'll drop into the chat a link for how you could find the online toolkit. Youth with disabilities or in the disability community also understand the unique aspect of the issues of disinformation and civic engagement and human rights. And that's really key for where they can play a role in identifying activities that they could be more a part of through a global coalition of young democracy leaders. And there's a global alliance for youth political action that IFES and others are a part of. Find out how you can be part of that. And I will also drop in a report that was created by that alliance into the chat for those interested. So you could learn more about how groups are working together to really lift the voice of young people across broad spectrums as we enter the year of action. Kathy?
Thanks, Mike. So yeah, the Summit for Democracy has generated a lot of conversation around important themes like combating corruption and ensuring that democratic institutions are strong and work effectively for everyone, right? So these are issues that clearly affect the lives and futures of youth with disabilities, but we know that youth with disabilities haven't always been as included in those conversations as they should be. So we're hopeful that the events that Mike just referenced, as well as the Summit for Democracy side event that USAID and the State Department co-hosted with the governments of the United Kingdom and Norway this past December 3rd, we're hoping that these will continue to help open the door for persons with disabilities, including youth with disabilities, to be actively engaged, especially as we move through this year of action on disability inclusive democracy.
Thank you both for those sort of really concrete suggestion of ways that young people with disabilities can engage. I think it's particularly interesting to hear there'll be a Youth Democracy Summit later this year. I'm sure we'll all look forward to hearing more information about that. And Kathy, thanks also for reminding us that President Biden has announced that this year is the Disability Inclusive Democracy Year of Action. So hopefully there'll be a lot of space for young people with disabilities to engage in that. Kathy, Mike, what advice would you give to young leaders during this upcoming year of action?
So yeah, as I mentioned, we were really excited to be able to organize that side event this past December 3rd, International Day of Persons with Disabilities. And that side event launched this year of action for disability inclusive democracy with a promise to release a disability inclusive democracy action plan at the next Summit for Democracy meeting at the end of 2022. So that action plan is intended to lay out promising practices, recommendations for both the United States and other international stakeholders working to uphold democracy around the world. So during this year of action, we encourage everyone interested in these issues to consider what are the common challenges and innovative approaches to promoting democracy that is truly inclusive of persons with disabilities. We want your ideas to feed into that action plan to ensure that the action plan is responsive also to the concerns and ideas of youth with disabilities. And we really appreciate, as I said, IFES's collaboration on this event as one way to help get input from youth with disabilities, but there will be more events coming up. So for example, colleagues at the State Department are looking at multiple online listening sessions for youth with disabilities to share their perspectives and challenges and offer solutions to the barriers faced by persons with disabilities in public life. State will be hosting a side event on these issues at the Conference of States Parties to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which will be coming up more in the middle of the year. And beyond formal events like this, we also encourage youth with disabilities to consider speaking informally with your peers, your allies. What does disability inclusive democracy mean for you? What's working? What's not working? And of course, always being careful, what is safe in your country context, right? How can these concerns and recommendations be raised with decision makers and making that voice heard? Mike?
Yeah, no, those were fabulous recommendations and very targeted to the opportunities. I think, just a few other things to think about. Connect with other alliances that might be working on this issue. So I mentioned, and I dropped in the chat, the information on the Global Alliance for Youth Political Action, and make sure that your organizations are part of that dialogue going on with, other partners like donors like USAID or State Department or other governments, and read that Walking the Walk report. Mainly, hold us accountable, speak truth to power. And we've seen that recently, different groups saying, we didn't quite feel that our equities are represented in what's coming out of that. And we want to partner with you to make sure that we can do more around the space of the role of youth with disabilities in political and civic action. So, link your concrete suggestions. And this is one of the things that we always recommend is like, not just we want a seat at the table. That doesn't get any of the groups anywhere, but it's like, in relationship to those pillars that Virginia mentioned, on anti-corruption and, shrinking space for civil society, think about how your organizations play a role or could play a role in some of these issues, because they do disproportionately affect a number of the groups here in different ways. And really think about what concrete suggestions and partnerships you want to be a part of. And then, connect into these other growing networks such as Generation Unlimited and what they're doing, Youth Lead, or the Global Youth Mobilization, which is getting some seed capital funding to youth-led efforts around these areas.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Mike. It's really good to hear the momentum from the first Summit for Democracy is leading to the drafting of a disability inclusive democracy action plan, which is a big mouthful, but something I know that's really exciting and I'll be interested to hear more about. And that there's opportunities for sharing more feedback, including the Conference of States Parties this June, as well as through the different mechanisms that you mentioned, Mike, like the Global Alliance for Youth Political Action. This is the first year that the US government has made commitments to the Global Disability Summit. Are there any USAID commitments that you both would particularly want young people with disabilities to know about?
Yeah, no, I think it's been excellent to see the commitments made during this summit, and some of the particular GDS commitments to highlight in terms of, I'll just give the education side of it. One of the commitments is to advance the knowledge base on what works in disability inclusive education in partnership with other organizations of persons with disabilities, and to really strengthen the use of disability data in our own education programming. Second would be, how are we better incorporating principles of universal design for learning, UDL, for all learners in all new USAID education programs? And then how do we increase USAID initiatives for learners with disabilities in pre-primary education, in youth workforce development, and in higher education, as well as education financing programs that we're funding? And then lastly, can we continue to provide USAID staff and partners with the knowledge, skills, and tools to really effectively implement disability inclusive education as well as UDL at all levels? So those are just a few. Kathy?
Yeah, I'm really excited that we were able to submit commitments this year. 23 total for the United States, 16 from USAID. And those commitments cover a whole range of issues that we hope will resonate with people with disabilities of all ages, from the disability inclusive education commitments that Mike was mentioning, to access to rehabilitation and assistive technology, disability inclusive humanitarian assistance, peace building. We're pleased that one of the commitments relates to disability inclusive climate change, which is a newer area of focus for us, but really important, right? And another relates to ensuring that persons with disabilities can fully engage in the political and public life of their communities, the kinds of issues that we're discussing today. All 16 of those commitments have been entered into the Global Disability Summit portal. I keep checking to see if they've updated to show the commitments for 2022. They're still showing the 2018 commitments. So I hope that they'll be up very soon. But we encourage everybody today to look them up, look at them for yourself. And we want youth with disabilities to be key partners in all of the work referenced in those commitments as we look to implement those commitments by 2026. And I think a colleague has just helpfully posted the website for the Global Disability Summit, where people can go to read those commitments. Thanks for that.
Kathy, Mike, both, thank you so much. It's really exciting to see how these initiatives are going to expand the reach of USAID's work to include more young people with disabilities. Kathy, I've also been pressing refresh on the Global Disability Summit website, so I hope to see all those commitments there soon. And I know they'll give all of us advocates on this call some specific reference points for advocacy with government and civil society partners. So I think you've left us with a lot to think about and many avenues for continued engagement. I would like to now see if we have any questions from the audience. If you have a question for Mike or Kathy, if you could please just drop any questions in the chat section of the Q&A on Zoom, and I know they will be happy to answer them. While we're giving people just a minute to think about that and to type in any questions that they might have, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about in what ways you see young people with disabilities having the most impact and what barriers and challenges might still exist to meaningful engagement in political and civic life for young people with disabilities.
So yeah, I really appreciate the USAID Youth Online platform that Mike's been talking about is called Youth Lead, because that's exactly the role that all youth, including youth with disabilities, should have in the political and public life of their countries, right? A leadership role. But we all know that's not always the case, and not only for reasons of disability and age discrimination, but biases related to other aspects of identity for youth with disabilities, whether that's gender, race, religion, sexual orientation, and more. And I'm excited about the leadership role that youth with disabilities are already taking now in a wide range of USAID projects, whether that's advocating for changes to election access practices, pushing to end language deprivation for deaf and hard of hearing people. And I want to acknowledge here that we've been having trouble with the captioning today and apologize for that. I know colleagues are really trying to work to fix that, but just acknowledging that and apologies. Or whether it's making sure that youth with disabilities have access to entrepreneurship and job opportunities as other people have. So I know we'll be hearing from the next panel about very specific challenges that exist in the democracy context. But for me, the biggest challenge still remains the expectations of others. We need societies at large and decision makers in particular to understand that inclusion in civic and political life isn't just a nice thing or a favor to persons with disabilities. We need those decision makers to understand the cost of exclusion, not only to persons with disabilities, but society as a whole. When we exclude persons with disabilities from political and public life, that's not only a human rights violation, it deprives everybody of the creativity, ideas, and solutions that we know persons with disabilities, including youth, have to offer, and we're all the worse off for it. So that's the thing that for me still needs to change. Mike?
Yeah, no, great points. For me, I think one of the interesting places to start focus is on municipal development, local development. Both in terms of the networking that goes on, but how young leaders can impact local policy. Sometimes there's so many barriers to affecting national policy, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't focus there. But a lot of times we find that young leaders from different issues, when they're working with local authorities and making them aware of what is it like to be confronted by the barriers that they're facing, getting them to be more aware, getting community members to be more aware has been really effective in changing local policies and ordinances and things like that. And then holding them accountable, whether it's a scorecard on, disability access in your community or looking at different ways that issues are being addressed there. And so we've got a number of different examples that have gone on I'm thinking about in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. One of our Young African Leader Initiative members, has really worked on an innovation academy, which focuses on enabling marginalized youth with disabilities to turn their challenges into opportunities as social entrepreneurs. And they've created a whole social innovation academy around that. So there's some different ways that we're seeing that working. And hopefully the panelists coming up next are going to give you some really clear examples of what that looks like in action.
Thank you both. I think we've got quite a few comments now and questions in the chat. In terms of comments, Esma has pointed out that people with disabilities experience sort of additional costs when they're running for office to be a candidate, such as maybe they need a personal assistant or sign language interpretation. And so she was stressing just the importance of thinking about that and coming up with policies around that. Then Olivia has asked, where would you point to as USAID's best practice example of disability inclusion in political participation, and has asked for some examples that would be helpful. So I don't know if anything comes to mind, Kathy or Mike, on that.
Actually, I think possibly that's an area where IFES has actually been most closely involved in some of those efforts, right? So that may be a place where you would like to post some of the examples of the tools that have come out of projects, and some of the country-specific examples of making those political processes more open and accessible to people, and having people with disabilities play a leadership role in that, whether that's as election monitors and elsewhere. I want to acknowledge also that the point that Esme raised about the costs and the differential impact experienced by candidates with disabilities is something that was raised in the December 3rd event, and that's something that that is a repeating theme. So I want to thank you for raising that and re-emphasizing it.
No, I mean, and both in the political space and in the economic space of providing that access. One of our projects, again, through our Young African Leaders Initiative, Empower Africa, is around women in energy in Africa. And one of our members who founded the Women in Energy Africa initiative focuses on promoting gender diversity and disability inclusion in jobs in the African energy sector. And so really looking at employability there and what the requirements are to get through some of the traditional barriers in an industry that hasn't had a lot of space. And how do we work with the private sector and public sector to change policies to expand those employment and entrepreneurship opportunities?
Yeah, thank you both. I guess maybe I could ask some colleagues of mine if you could drop into the chat. We have a website, electionaccess.org. Which is sort of a repository of good practices happening all around the world in this space. So if I could ask a colleague to pop that in. And then also our Equal Access Manual, which has sort of arranged throughout the electoral process, different entry points for government and civil society to engage in the political process. So those two resources might be of use. We have another question from Penny about how do you see the Disability Inclusive Democracy Year of Action linking to the Global Disability Summit? And is there an opportunity to perhaps bring together these two accountability processes?
So I want to acknowledge that we've tried, the State Department and USAID both have a commitment, and when they appear in the portal, you'll be able to see them. But each agency had put forward a commitment that's intended to try to cross-fertilize those two processes, right? To in the case of USAID, to reference the our support for promoting the participation of persons with disabilities in political and public life, which is the overarching goal. And then our colleagues at the State Department who have a commitment that's a little bit more sort of explicitly tied to the Year of Action related to the Summit for Democracy. So we're excited to have that opportunity to bring the Summit for Democracy into the GDS space, and hopeful that events like this, and thank you for co-hosting this, bring a forum where we can talk about these issues in the GDS space, and really amplify these democracy related issues.
And definitely from our own units, we will look to make sure that as a Youth Democracy Summit for 2022 is starting to be planned, that we're bringing in all the organizations whose voices need to be part of the design of that, to make sure that that's representative and create spaces to really bring awareness to some of these issues. I think back to one of my site visits in Armenia, and one of our projects in Armenia was working on voting rights, and seeing how they were working to make sure that there was accessibility at polling places for persons with disability. All of these components need to be coming into how we look at revitalizing democracy, rights, and governance.
Thank you both. I think we have time for one more question, so I'm actually going to combine it into two, and then Mike, Kathy, maybe pick which one you'd like to take of that. Jennifer has asked, in terms of the U.S. government's Global Disability Summit commitments, it was mentioned that disability inclusion would be a requirement for humanitarian assistance. And so her question is that going to be a requirement for all aid, or is it very specifically humanitarian assistance? And then Vasu's asked a question about hearing more about the challenges faced by people with disabilities as a result of climate change, and what policy and programming interventions that you might see possible in that space. So maybe one of you can take one of those and one maybe take the other, or however you'd like to handle that. And then we'll turn it over to our next panel.
I'm going to suggest that Kathy handles both those because she's working very intensely on both those issues right now. So
very quickly, with respect to the question about the humanitarian assistance, so as I said, we're working on our policy, and that policy we hope will infuse all of USAID's work. Just because we've made very specific commitments in the Global Disability Summit context, where we're looking to be held accountable on some very concrete issue-specific things here. This is not intended to imply that disability inclusion isn't still very relevant to everything that USAID does, right? So I just want to be clear that being able to focus on this round of GDS commitments on a specific issue is not intended to imply that we don't see disability inclusion as relevant across all of USAID's work. And we know we have more to do to effect that inclusion. But just to be clear, it's not intended to imply that it's not important elsewhere. And I'm sorry, remind me of the second question again.
climate.
Sorry, say again?
Climate change.
Climate change. So we have an annual competition for USAID missions for our annual disability funding. And this year it's focused on climate change, disability inclusive climate action specifically. We do advertise that publicly because we want the disability community to be approaching missions with project concepts and to share your ideas. And we know that climate change disproportionately affects persons with disabilities. So we need to do more to build the resilience of people. We also know that solutions to climate change and climate mitigation can and should come from anywhere. And we know the disability community wants to participate in that. So this is our first effort to try to marry those things together and really have some focused engagement on bringing the disability community into climate change resilience and mitigation efforts. So we don't have great examples of what's happening yet, but we hope with this investment over the next year or so that we can really start building a portfolio and have that be built out in the future.
Great, thank you. Thanks for this interesting discussion, Kathy and Mike. I'd like to now turn it over to Neetha Tangirala, who's USAID's Senior Advisor for Youth, Civic Education, and Activism. So all very relevant focuses for our conversation today. She's going to be moderating our second panel, and her focus at USAID is on understanding how youth networks and coalitions can help maintain civic space and effective approaches that both can reshape norms and increase representation of young people in decision-making processes. So Neetha, please, over to you.
Thank you, Virginia, and thank you so much to the previous panel. That's been super helpful. My name is Neetha Tangirala. I'm a cisgender brown woman of Indian origin with long black hair, wearing an orange shirt, gray cardigan, and sitting in front of a bookshelf filled with colorful books that I must confess I have not fully read. Delighted to be here. As we've discussed, it is critical to work alongside our young partners to identify evidence-based and context-relevant approaches to increase the political participation and leadership of youth. In this next session, we want to hear from two young leaders about how we can better re-engage people with disabilities in democratic processes, both during and after the pandemic. I know that we're struggling to get one of our speakers on, so hopefully he'll be able to join. If not, we'll take the opportunity to maybe expand the Q&A section to hear from our wonderful audience. But first, I'm excited to introduce our speakers for this panel. Our first speaker, Geenie Gunasekera, is from Sri Lanka. She's a first-year undergraduate at the University of Colombo, Faculty of Arts. She is studying political science, followed by international relations, sociology, and psychology. She's a member of the Disability Inclusive Elections in Sri Lanka Technical Working Group, and also a member of the first cohort of Engaging a New Generation for Accessible Governance and Elections, ENGAGE, conducted by IFES. Geenie aspires to pursue a career in international development and help advocate for the inclusion of persons with disabilities in Sri Lanka. Welcome, Geenie. And our next speaker, hopefully, Ruben Mampatiani, is a 26-year-old advocate from Kenya and belongs to an indigenous community. He is the founder of Narok Albinism Association, which works closely with young people with disabilities, as well as the general population of persons with disabilities by partnering with other organizations to empower young people to participate in political processes. He visits different communities to raise awareness around the issues facing young people with disabilities. And this work has enabled him to better understand the critical barriers and help address young people with disabilities inclusion in democratic processes. He's active in the Global Caucus of Youth with Disabilities through the International Disability Alliance. So welcome, Geenie and Ruben. Ruben, keeping our fingers crossed that you will be able to join us. Let's jump to the first question, Geenie, that's for you. As we embark on this year of action following the Summit for Democracy, what would you like to see happen in your countries, or in your country and community? And what are the ways in which government can more effectively engage with young people with disabilities?
Yes, thank you, Neetha, for that question. I would like to express my ideas like this. Now, when it comes to democracy, democracy has been a worldwide concept that has been involved, and South Asian region and including Sri Lanka has been implementing democracy within our countries. And when it comes to democracy, one of the main features of democracy is that equality. So when it comes to equality, we have a question that do this equality is implemented within our country? Like when it comes to, there is some kind of a discrimination within the society, like how they treat towards people with disabilities, and is there equal opportunities for both people with disabilities and people who are without disabilities? So when it comes to this point, we find that accessing for governance, like elections, then when it comes to democracy, people with disabilities face through a lot of marginalized factors, like under like gender, sexuality, disability, then ethnicity, racism, and like various other aspects. So within these all kind of things, so we find that people with disabilities, the youth especially, is discriminated. Like they are like differently seen by others. So which is really a very sensitive aspect we see within our country. And the political parties, when it comes to governance, like how the government should focus on these kind of issues, like the political parties should like give opportunities for youth to come ahead and come forward, and how to engage in this kind of activities when it comes to democracy. They should like structure themselves, like giving opportunities to youth with disabilities in their political agenda. And I would like to see the community of my country being actively engaged in democracy. And I would love if our people with disabilities, especially the youth, come forward and take the opportunity of being great leaders. Yes,
Jeannie, that's super helpful. And I want to sort of unpack some of those concepts a bit later, particularly around opportunity. I think it's a really important point you've made about political parties. Adrina, I may call upon you after we get through these set of questions to sort of add your thoughts as well, given that I think we're still unable to get Ruben online. So Jeannie, maybe we can move over to the second question. And Arena, maybe you can kind of continue to think about this first question as well. What challenges do young people with disabilities continue to face when participating in political life? And I think you touched upon this, Jeannie, already, but we would love to hear more.
Yes, sure. Yes, when it comes to challenges, it's a very sensitive part. Like when it comes to challenges, the youth with disabilities face a lot of challenges. Especially, I would love to cover this section by using 3 points. Like first would be my point would be when it comes to inaccessibility and how people are being discriminated within the social stigmas. Like the society keeps like they have their own norms towards these people with disabilities. Like they always try to corner them, like kind of like they have some certain norms, and those negative statements, like especially using social media and media, like they prominently do this. Like they are the ones who like create disparities between the people with disabilities and who are the people without disabilities, which is not the case. Like both are having the same kind of if they get opportunities, I mean, like everybody can showcase their talents within it. So I think the society should give the opportunity. Like when it comes to government, especially, they have to give an opportunity. Like when it comes to leadership, they should give the chance. So there are a lot of youth people with disabilities. They love to engage in these kind of areas, but they won't be able because of this social stigma. So people, when they try to come to forward and try to showcase their talents, but the society keeps dragging them behind, pull them behind. So which is a very sensitive part to it, I see, within society. And my second point would be like how the like psychosocial disabilities and intention sorry I the people who have disabilities, like intellectual disabilities. So these two kinds like are very very sensitive kind of issues. They society thinks that they are incapable, like they can't come forward and do. But we should be really very mindful of these issues. Like how can we say that they are incapable? Like each and every one of us are unique, and we have our own kind of things. So why does people keep fine, like they can't come into governance? Like why do they can't because it's like said in the UNCRPD also, that from the Article 12, it is very clearly mentioned that all people are equal before the law. So everybody should get the opportunity, the chances to access in governance and democracy, to use their voting power and to be candidates and participate in elections actively. So this is what I see. that's what I want to express from my second point. And the third point would be is that giving perfect training and awareness when it comes to like there are youth with disabilities. They don't have this awareness the right about their rights when it comes to governance. Uh, how what are the powers they have now when if they have issues in accessing to these like now when we say voting like poll stations and all, they can get these facilities whatever they want, but people with disabilities they don't have this knowledge. So I think people should be like these kind of things. They think that they are challenges, but no, but they everything has a solution. So I think there should be proper awareness in that sense. So and political parties and they should be like aware of these kinds of things. So that would be my third point would be covering this question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeannie. That's incredibly helpful. And again, I want to sort of dive more into some of the themes that you touched upon, related to stigma, related to, trying to increase that sense of community and support and allyship to help sort of achieve those goals you talked about around sort of individual dignity. And maybe that's, again, as you mentioned, through training and awareness. I want to see if we can hear from Ruben, if possible, to catch up a bit here on question 1 and 2. Question 1 on the year of action and what governments can do to effectively engage with young people with disabilities, and the second one around challenges that young people with disabilities face in participating in political life. Ruben, are we able to get you on now? If not, maybe we can try and go to question 3 and then try again with Ruben to get his overall thoughts on all 3 questions. Maybe Jeannie, let's keep going. An important question. What recommendations do you have for USAID and other donor governments on how to support engagement of young people with disabilities in political and civic life? And I think that also extends to some of the international partners that you may have engaged with, national partners. What are your recommendations?
Yes. I would simply my recommendations would be like I would like to recommend that help for empowerment of the people with disabilities, especially youth. We need like empowerment. They do for their dignity and pride of their disabilities and kind of like we need empowerment so that would encourage youth with disabilities to engage in this active democracy and governance and like voice up like voice their individuality, like how to come across these norms that society has towards us. And through that I think there would be no such the youth will definitely will be coming forward if they have this kind of encouraging motivative kind of sessions organized by the organizations. So then so what if I say like political parties, like advocating political parties to allocate a seat for representatives, especially in countries they pay less attention on this fact, like allocating a seat for people with disabilities to represent at the legislature. So we should be recommending like advocate the political parties for giving this kind of a seat allocated for the people with disabilities, and plus also like advocating political parties to include like inclusion of people with disabilities, and training new leaders with people who are with people with disabilities to come forward and forming a new generation in this political arena. So and I would love to say like equipping like the young generation to come forward like in leadership, like giving them sharing knowledge and giving them awareness about how the opportunities and the law and how they have the right and all, making them aware of this kind of facts that how the people with disabilities have in their selves. So those would be my recommendations.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And again, it's really interesting that you're framing a lot of your recommendations around these existing power structures of, legislatures and parties, and how those places where, discussions about, civic and political life, laws, regulations, governance, that's where we need to really get young people with disabilities front and center, and ensure that their representation is there within these structures. That's super helpful. Thank you so much, Geenie. I want to see if we can hear from Ruben. Let's try one more time.
I can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you. Wonderful. Welcome, Ruben.
Yes. Yeah.
Go ahead. Feel free to share with us, if you may. Maybe you're able to summarize the 3 questions, your answers to what you want to see in the year of action, the commitments you want your government to make, some of the challenges that, in your experience, young people with disabilities face in engaging in civil and political life, and the recommendations that you have for USAID, for donors, for partners, for international, national partners. Yes, please do. Go ahead.
We're reconnecting. Sorry, everyone. Okay, Ruben, are you back?
Yeah, good governance. Good governance will help indigenous youth with disabilities to access government services and creation of opportunities in a transparency way. Also, fairness and equality. When there is fairness and equality, indigenous youth with disabilities will be able to get job opportunities without discriminations. Also, inclusivity of all people. Indigenous youth with disabilities need to be provided equal access to resources that will help them to finance the projects and activities. Also, favorable environment. Youth with disabilities need good environment. This includes good working environment, which facilities favorable for disabled people, also conducive for their health. This will achieve through construction of infrastructure that will help in favorable to people with disabilities. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ruben. That was really helpful. I wonder if you may take a few seconds to talk a little bit about the challenges young people with disabilities continue to face in participating in political life from your experience.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Some of the challenges are lack of proper awareness. In the indigenous community, youth lack information because of the communication channels, and institutions sometimes lack the right agents who work in the field, hence make creations of awareness to the challenge. Secondly, lack of inclusivity. Most of indigenous youth with disabilities are not included in resources allocation and job opportunity. This creates a huge gap between youth with disabilities from the others. Youth with disabilities were not given chances in the community to participate in leadership election processes. There was a lot of stigma and discrimination that made them no authority to participate in decision-making or leadership election. I remember personally, I faced a challenge when I was looking to represent a group of persons with albinism in my region. Many considered that I would not be able to succeed, to reach.
Sorry, we lost the connection again. It'll probably just be a few seconds.
No problem. And yeah, go ahead, Ruben.
I didn't give up in my dreams. They end up electing me to represent them with high percentage. Also, lack of relevant technology. Most of the youth with disability lack relevant technology, and this will hinder them in getting information that will empower them. Also, lack of proper knowledge and training. Youth need relevant training that will help them acquire skills needed to achieve in life, but most of them lack training. This made them to lag behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruben. That's really helpful. I really like what you're talking about in terms of like the realities, right, of resource allocation, job opportunities. And I feel that this really intersects, and what you're saying about the importance of getting young people with disabilities, the opportunities, the support needed to participate in decision-making processes, leadership really kind of intersects with what Jeannie was talking about this real need for representation in parliaments and political parties and these, these formal structures that are still, important and a vital lever of democracy. So that's really helpful to hear both of you really touch on those points. Finally, Ruben, what recommendations do you have for USAID and other donor governments? Ruben, hopefully you're still there, because this is the key question. We're eager to hear your recommendations to USAID and other donors. If not, maybe we could jump over to Irina. Irina, I wonder if you wanted to add any sort of thoughts based on the three questions we explored as a part of this panel. In particular, recommendations that you have for the community of implementers and donors.
Thank you, Neetha. Yes, Jeannie started already talking about intersectionality, and my main recommendation would be to consider intersectionality inside the community, disability community, in programming, because it's crucially important. Programs aimed at young people with disabilities and adult people with disabilities should be programmed and designed in completely different mode. And we will achieve more effect, and the programming will be more efficient when we profile our target audience. What also Jeannie and Ruben said, they underlined that discrimination, lack of awareness, lack of knowledge are like important challenges preventing young people from political participation worldwide. And I think these problems are relevant for many countries as well, for Ukraine. From our personal experience, I want to add one more challenge, is the lack of networking. In 2019, we launched the School for Political Participation for Women and Girls with Disabilities together with IFES. And we saw how important it is for young people and activists with disabilities to have this safe community a safe space where they can share their thoughts, fears, they can get together, and where they inside can empower each other. So I would add also this small point to what Jeannie said also. And like resuming all what we said, I just want you to have one message to take home is regardless the challenges, young people with disabilities are ready to engage. And that's what we have to understand. And they are ready to help the governments to uphold the commitments made both within the Summit for Democracy and the Global Disability Summit. And here, effective cooperation of the governments with international partners, as well as disability community, on the way of empowering people with disabilities could be a premise for effective commitment to the Disability Inclusive Year of Action. I hope you continue to engage with IFES, USAID, our amazing young leaders, such as Jenny and Ruben, thank you very much. And I hope in your communities, in your countries, you will find such young leaders as Jeannie and Ruben, and you will work together with them to implement the commitments. There is much work to be done, but uniting our efforts, we can foster positive changes. Thank you very much for the interpreters. And I would like to thank you, for everyone for joining us today. And separate thank you for the speakers and moderators. All the useful information and resources you can find in the chat. And we encourage you to learn more about IFES and USAID's work with young people with disabilities and stay connected. Thank you very much for